So I should start, I suppose. Well, welcome everybody. I'm Jim Langford. I'm the executive director of SHECP. I started with the organization last October after running several other nonprofits for a number of years. I ran technology companies way back and did a lot of other social service things even before that. So I've had a weird, unusual, varied background. But the entrepreneurial work that I did both in technology companies as well as nonprofits, I think prepared me in a way I didn't expect to have to be prepared for the past few months, where, oh my gosh, I thought we were on a great, easy track of predictable of how we were going to run this summer and, the programs for the past few months. And then, of course, everything went crazy in March. And we thought we weren't going to be able to have the program at all this summer, the internship program. But I'm really happy that we were able to roll with the punches, figure it out. We've got some smart people on staff. We've got some smart people out there who are part of our SHECP community, and we went to work and we figured it out. And then we had these great partnership organizations out there too, community partners, who said, "Yeah, we'll try this online thing. We're willing to do that. We want the help from these students." And so it has been we expected about 40 students. We thought that would be a success if we could pull it off with 40 students in a remote way of having an internship program. And we've had 84. So it's far exceeded what we had hoped for. And so that's wonderful. And it's gone beyond that, meaning that what we've been able to do, and thanks to Stephanie and Amy for their hard work and everybody else, and Danielle, we've been able to create an academic program, an online academic program in internships. I don't know anybody else that's doing that around the country. I'm sure somebody is somewhere, but this is hard to do, and we've pulled it off, and not just pulled it off, but really excelled at expanding our academic program in this kind of way. And that's terrific. That's, again, Stephanie really put in a lot of hard work and long hours to make that happen. And Amy had to rematch everybody, in the organizations out there, the community organizations too. And man, but we did it. And so congratulations to them and to all of you for being part of this new format for SHECP. And it will be, beyond the pandemic, beyond the days when this pandemic is over, this will still be an important part of what we're able to deliver. And that's a program that has online components to it. Now, how we mix that in with in-person programs, going forward, I don't know. We're still working through a strategic plan where we'll, figure that out. But it's a wonderful tool to have in the toolbox to know we can pull this off. Thanks to the Shepherd family, Nancy and Katie, great to see you on screen. It was my great desire and wish and plan to come see you, in March and April in New England. That didn't happen. Of course, I haven't been able to go anywhere else either. But I'm going to come back. I am going to get there to see you. And so we'll just figure that out whenever I can get on an airplane and get up there to see you. If you were driving distance, like a couple of hours away, I'd already perhaps been there to see you, but we'll figure it out. We'll get there. But thanks to you. To Scott Allard, thank you, Scott, for being such a big part of this program this summer. We had you scheduled, I think, for one event or two events, and we expanded that to, to 3 or 4. And so you've been a terrific part of the program this summer. We really appreciate that.
Thank you.
And as you know, we expanded our message or our academic focus. It was the geography of poverty is what we came up with as a theme a year ago. Planned that to be a 2-year type of theme, and this year we added the extra words on the end. Geography of poverty in pandemic. Because that's where we are. So, and here we are in another unexpected way of expanding ourselves geographically and been able to pull that off through technology. So thanks for that, Scott. And then also great thanks to Alan Tinkler. Alan's our board chair, and Alan has been a terrific mentor to me during this transition process of, a new executive director and what all that means. And so Alan and I talk once a week at least, and when we do, I'm always learning something, and we're always moving this thing forward. And so, Alan, thank you so much, for your help, and look forward to continuing to rely on you as time goes on. And Alan ends his chairmanship of the board in the next week or so. And so this is one of the formal thank yous to Alan as we close out his tenure as board chair. Thanks, Alan. And thanks to all the mentors who've been, this is a SHEP community. Those of you students who are new to the program, this is your first experience with this program. As time goes by, over the next 2 or 3 or 4 years and beyond, 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, you're going to look back on this and this community as being a valuable part of your lives, a valuable part of your past, and a valuable part of your present as time moves forward. And so we welcome you as part of that. Too bad we can't have at least this year, a time where we can all get together and meet each other in a more informal way, where you can go down to a bar and have a beer together, or stand over in a corner and have some hors d'oeuvres or something else, where we can socialize, in a more almost random way and make those kind of interpersonal connections. But we'll get to that. We'll do that. We'll invite you back, next year if we can do an in-person thing. We'll invite you. You'll always be welcome as part of this community to share ideas with each other, to continue your relationships with mentors as you go forward, learn more about other organizations. We hope it's meaningful to you in a career way, going forward, not just a little line on a resume somewhere, but something much, much bigger than that. We rely on these personal connections, and you're sharing ideas too, and moving forward with these important projects and programs related to poverty. And that leads me back to our last thought on our strategic planning process. We started it's about a 3-year process that SHEP does every 3 years. In February, we had a very big meeting of our governing board, and getting lots of things on the table, seeing how we want to tweak our mission and vision statements, and then what that means with regard to specific program things. This past 3 or 4 months has been very helpful to us thinking about the future, what we can do, what we can take in terms of our new tools, where we can move to in this kind of new environment. And so stay tuned for more of that. And we'll be inviting some of you to participate as we move forward to more communication on this strategic plan and what that means. But I'm telling you, we're very good at an internship program and pulling that off. We're very good with having a strong academic base to that internship program. You've experienced that this year. We want to add a third leg to that stool, and that means engagement in a way in the communities in a change agent way. How can we be change agents with the things that we're doing as individuals and as an organization to help move lots of things forward? And that might mean more social justice work. We're just going to be experimenting and talking about that a good deal. We may create some new models in some new cities, in some cities where we haven't had a strong presence. Atlanta is one of those. Chicago may be another, where we can take some models, experiment with those in those cities with a number of institutions in those cities, and then take those models out to some other places. And again, we want to welcome you as part of that process as we brainstorm that, as we move that forward, as we experiment. I've heard this old adage, and I know you've heard it before too. If you're not growing, you're dying. There's just nothing in between. If you're not moving forward, then you're moving backwards. And I believe that. There's no status quo, especially as we've seen in this past few months, in this time. You gotta be prepared for the future. You gotta make the future your own. As you move forward. So that's what we want to be as an organization: nimble, expansive. See where we can be, as an organization, and keep moving that process forward. So, having said all of that, hope that wasn't too long of an introduction. I'm now going to introduce you to somebody you've already met before, and that is Raven Reese, who is helping us out, one of our students this summer. She's going to be introducing Scott to us in a more formal way. Let me tell you a little bit about Raven. She is a rising junior at the College of Worcester, where she's majoring in Spanish and early childhood education. Raven, terrific, that's great. Tenemos que hablar en español a veces, ¿no? Porque estuve en Argentina por un rato, so we can practice our Spanish at some future point together as we get to know each other better. She is a graduate of the Knowledge is Power program, or KIPP, K-I-P-P, the largest network of public charter schools in the country. In addition to her academic work at Worcester, Raven is a resident assistant, an RA, and a peer mentor. She serves on several boards that work to support children, women of color on her campus, such as the Black Women's Organization, Women of Images for Women of Color, and O Huddle, mentoring program for children. This summer, her work with rural and migrant ministries in Poughkeepsie, New York, connected her with rural farm workers. People don't think of farm workers being in Poughkeepsie or in the suburbs of New York, but we talked about that a few minutes ago. That is part of what Poughkeepsie is up there in that Hudson River Valley. And through that organization's mission to, quote, overcome the prejudices and poverty that degrade and debilitate people within rural New York by building communities that celebrate diversity, achieve true mutuality, and fight for dignity and opportunity to all. Raven shares a birthday with her mom. What birthday is that, Raven? When is your birthday?
October 19th.
October 19th? Okay, terrific. With her mom, she speaks 3 languages and enjoys arts and crafts. Raven, take it away.
Okay. Dr. Scott W. Allard, is a professor of public policy and governance at the Evans School of Public Policy and Governance at the University of Washington, where he has been since 2014. Allard is a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution Metropolitan Policy Program and a research affiliate of the Institute for Research on Poverty at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he is the co-lead of the Poverty and Geography Working Group. At the University of Washington, Allard is on the executive committee of the West Coast Poverty Center, serves as a faculty co-lead of urban at UW, and is an affiliate of the Center for Studies in Demography and Ecology. He has also held faculty positions at many universities around the country. His primary areas of research expertise are urban poverty, employment among low-skilled workers, food security, safety net utilization, and the spatial accessibility of governmental and non-governmental safety net programs. He is the author of Out of Reach, Place, Poverty, and the New American Welfare State, which examines the contemporary social service safety net through survey interviews with almost 1,500 government, for-profit, and nonprofit social service organizations. His most recent book, Places in Need, was published in 2017, which is also the book the interns were assigned to read this summer. Places in Need throws away the idea that urban areas are where a majority of people of color or poor people live. But actually, poverty exists in suburban areas too. Poverty is not just in one place, and there is no connection between poverty and place to race. Poverty in the suburbs is not a new concept. It has been a concept since the war on poverty. From reading Places in Need, I started to question people's ideas about poverty and where it exists, the difference between suburban, urban, and rural areas. And I began to ask where these differences based off of perception, or was there a set definition for these communities? If so, could these definitions become altered? I used to think urban meant city, not poor or people of color. That suburban meant the houses looked the same with the white picket fences and green grass, similar to the houses in Cat in the Hat. And rural was where farmers lived. After reading the book, I questioned my ideas. Why did I think suburban areas resembled the Hollywood definition of suburban neighborhoods? Many of the topics discussed in Places in Need I have talked about in my urban education class, where we learned, the books we read, and the types of students that we would have in our class. I attended a high school in an area I would say is urban, and observed a lot of what was mentioned in my urban education class and in Places in Need. Another reason I enjoyed reading this book is because I want to work in urban school districts, and continuing education, I can educate others by helping those who assume students who come from suburban areas are financially stable. when in reality, some of them may be living on the edge of poverty. After reading this great book by Dr. Allard, he is currently working with the Michigan Recession and Recovery Study, a panel survey of households in metropolitan Detroit, to examine how working poor families are coping in a persistently sluggish regional economy. He also is a co-investigator with the Seattle Minimum Wage Study, which is a multifaceted evaluation of the Seattle Minimum Wage Ordinance. In addition to these projects, he has published several articles on the geography of contemporary social welfare policy and on social service delivery in the post-welfare reform area that have appeared in a number of academic journals. Allard has received research grants supporting his work on social welfare policy from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Food and Nutrition Service, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Housing and Urban Development, and countless others. It is with great honor to present Dr. Scott Allard.
Yay. Thank you very much, Raven, for that wonderful introduction. It's so nice to be with you all today. Thank you to Stephanie and Jim for the opportunity to speak. I've been looking forward to today for a long time. I was looking forward to being with you in DC, but Zoom is where we're at. So thanks for coming today. And I appreciate you making time on your Friday for me. I really enjoyed my interactions with the program this summer, but the students and the staff and the faculty, and it's really impressive to see your work and to see the sacrifices, frankly, that you've all made. Your leadership comes at a really critical time for our country and for our communities. And so thank you for that. My plan today is to talk a little bit from my book. I'm going to throw up some slides. You don't have to, you won't get my video feed here straight, and you'll get some pictures and charts and things. Unfortunately, I think the book is more relevant today than I would have guessed maybe a year or two ago, as we were in a period of economic expansion and falling poverty. So today I'm going to talk about what I think is happening, what I think we're learning, and what I think is next. And hopefully that fits with some of the work you've been doing as you're processing your summers and your summer experiences. Before I begin, I want to tell you just a few things about me, and those who did the student session earlier this fall or this summer, and I think I did this with the faculty as well, may have heard this, but I talk about myself in this way and have done so intentionally since the book came out about 5 years ago. It's important for you to know kind of where the origins of my interests come and how I view them. So when I was growing up, I grew up in a household where my parents didn't go to college, and we had spells of periods of low income. We would have qualified as being poor at times. And had the safety net existed then in the early 70s, mid 70s, as it did today, we would have been on many of the programs that some of you might have participated in. Certainly the programs that the people you interact with and work with this summer have participated in. And I used to think that kind of certified me to study poverty and to talk about poverty, those experiences. And that, coupled with my Christian faith, which inspired me to kind of really prioritize the social justice ministry that I saw kind of central in Christianity. I thought that was enough to kind of make me certified, so to speak. But I think over time, I realized that I benefited from a lot of privileges as a white male in society that I could be aware of, and then also aware that there are privileges I don't even see and can't possibly understand that affect the opportunities I have, the experiences I get to enjoy, the places I get to live, the clothes I get to wear. And so understand that I'm aware of those privileges. Those privileges and that reality shapes how I think about research, how I think about my approach to research, and how I think about the translation of my research. And I think it's also, kind of reinforced my commitment to racial and social justice. But this book is a really good example of that work, where I spent time listening, learning, visiting, experiencing, kind of soaking in what was happening, trying to process it, challenging my own views and perspectives. I thought Raven was really eloquent about how the work this summer has helped her kind of turn inward about what she thinks and sees and experiences. I think we all should be doing that. I think it reflects a certain maturity to challenge your thinking. But from the listening and kind of visiting and learning and experiencing, I developed new perspectives, new ideas that challenge some of the ways that we think about poverty. And I think that kind of work is relevant to your paths forward, that being exposed and open to new ideas and new possibilities. So with that, I'm going to start to share my screen. and this should work. And I'll try to get my Zoom set up. So I'm going to start today by talking about two images that you will be familiar with if you were on the last call. These images help us think about the way we're conditioned to understand place, race, and poverty in our country. Poverty is largely viewed to be an urban phenomenon in the US. This is our popular understanding, but it translates to media and scholarly understandings. We have urban images commonly placed in our discussions and language around poverty issues. Cities are portrayed by our elected officials, by public intellectuals, by the media as places of non-normative behavior. And we tie those images of poverty directly to race. And so they inform not only our understandings of poverty, but they inform our understandings of racial groups in our country. By contrast, suburbs are perceived to be white places of affluence, places that embody the American dream and symbolize the normative behavior of work and family. And again, tying it to whiteness. Now, these images matter because they shape policy debate, they shape our political talk, they shape our scholarship, they shape our philanthropy in ways that often we don't realize. I was on a conference call yesterday and we were talking about Medicaid and substance abuse service provision, and we were having a conversation as if we were only thinking about these contexts in cities. And it took us a moment to step back and, with some prompts to think, well, we're having a conversation about cities, but substance abuse isn't a city problem only. In fact, actually, in many places, it's more prevalent in rural or suburban communities. So we have to kind of step back and think about how this kind of conventional wisdom, this conventional thinking, these conventional narratives push us to think and link place, race, and poverty together. And in more recent days, you are seeing these narratives used to stoke fear, promote racist stereotypes, and divide us as the election approaches, and to try to tell people in suburbs that poverty and people of color are coming to invade and coming to get them. These messages are not true. These are myths. These are narratives that, again, don't reflect demographic reality. And that's what the book tries to talk about, is the demographic realities. And in the book, I give a lot of examples about why this conventional thinking matters. It matters not just because it shapes our discourse. It matters not just because it blinds us to poverty problems in all places, but it really affects the way that we approach and develop solutions. And to me, that's really critical and often overlooked in these discussions. So as you read, and as we've talked this summer, the conventional thinking fosters a notion that poverty is a problem for others, that others bring to our communities, and a problem that only others experience. At best, this kind of conventional thinking leads us to look past structural economic change, the perils of low-wage work, and structural racism that are driving poverty in all places. At worst, again, this narrative promotes the most deleterious stereotypes about the poor, about people of color, and about deservingness for help. And you find this kind of thinking not just in suburbs and in rural areas, but also in cities, where we segregate ourselves by race and class and think about poor people as others in very much the same way. So even though in the book I talk about the conventional thinking being kind of an urban suburban narrative, you find this kind of narrative in cities. In fact, actually in my neighborhood here in Seattle, most people here voted for Bernie Sanders the last time we had a chance to vote. There's a lot of people here who oppose affordable housing and low-income housing in our neighborhood. And that's, again, kind of epitomizes this sense that others are coming. I think the kind of phenomenon of Karen on social media this summer also kind of reflects these notion of others and the fear that othering creates. The conventional thinking creates blind spots for researchers, media, philanthropy, and policymakers. Again, sorry, I hit my mouse. It makes it easier for us to kind of ignore poverty outside our cities. It makes it easier for us to think that solutions are someone else's responsibility. And in doing so, it undermines our support for both the public and the private components of our safety net. And this leads to a safety net that's deeply fragmented, deeply unequal, less effective, and far less efficient than it could be. This matters. It's not just words. These things matter downstream to poor people, to low-income people broadly, but to our entire society. And I think today, when you look around and think about what's happening with COVID, you see these narratives happening where we are less willing to take responsibility, more willing to blame others, more willing to look outside our door, our neighborhoods or communities to try to cast blame or find cause. So I start this conversation today because the narrative is prevalent, as I said, even among poverty scholars. And if we're going to do different work, we have to train ourselves to think differently. And that's one of the missions of this book and of the work and of my teaching. So this slide comes from the book. It's updated for the most recent census data. And what you see and what you understand is poverty is on the rise in suburbs. At the same time, we should note that poverty hasn't gone away in cities or in rural places. We live in a period where poverty has increased and is increasing everywhere, which is a very different and unique time period in American history. The causes of poverty increases are structural economic causes largely, although in some places immigration and migration matter. But largely it's structural economic causes, structural racism and discrimination in the labor market, lack of access to good jobs that don't pay enough. That's the primary cause. And in suburbs, people are becoming poor in place. Poverty isn't driven by people moving in largely, it's by people who've lived in suburbs for a long time becoming poor in place, struggling to afford the basics for their families. Now this is counts. As I talk about in the book, counts matter. Poverty rates matter too. Counts matter because they reflect the burden on our communities. Poverty rates matter because they talk about prevalence. And even though poverty rates in suburbs are about half of what they are in cities, they've been converging. And my guess is that the upward trajectory of poverty in the wake of COVID will bring suburbs even more in line with cities as hardship and unemployment persist. This chart also obscures the fact that there are lots of people living just above the poverty line. In fact, there are many, many more people, I think close to 50 million people in suburbs living within 150% of poverty. Here, I have about 17 million people living in poverty. So you see that there's a large number of people just on the edge, vulnerable to falling into poverty, and certainly vulnerable to hardship given their low levels of income. This chart also doesn't show that there are way more people in suburbs than in cities who live on less than $10,000, $12,000, $13,000 a year, roughly half the poverty rate. This doesn't show that homelessness problems are as severe in most suburbs as they are in cities. This doesn't capture all the hardship. Our measures just don't reflect that accurately. We don't have the data always. But this chart's a good heuristic. It helps us think and motivate what's happening. Now, the safety net response is why we're here, right? This is why we're doing internships. This is why we've come together. We're interested in how we can reduce poverty, how we can tackle poverty, how we can fight poverty. And it's important for us to realize, and many of you get this, I think, through your internship experiences, that our safety net's not a monolithic national safety net or welfare state. It is really thousands and thousands of local safety nets, some with federal funding and programs embedded within them. To some degree, that's true. But a lot of it is local effort, local action, and local resources. And the capacity, as we've developed it over the last 30 or 40 years, kind of in the modern safety net, is predicated on the concentration of poverty in cities. This local reality, the reality that safety nets are local, matters, and it matters in our time of COVID. Our local safety nets, our local service providers are under duress, and their capacity and maybe even ability to exist in the future is threatened. And what we will see is the communities that are able to sustain their local safety nets, those communities that are most resilient, will be those that return and recover the most quickly. And this has always been true, and this is even more true now. So we know that different types of programs are differently responsive to poverty in different types of places. And our local safety nets, as I noted, are a mix of federal funds, state and local funds programs, public and private. We know, and there's evidence in the book, that federally funded and administrative programs are more responsive to increases in poverty wherever they occur. And you see this in programs like SNAP or food stamps or the Earned Income Tax Credit. There's a vast number of programs that are really important to our safety net, however, that don't operate this way, that allow for state and local control or discretion or autonomy. Those vary widely from place to place, even neighborhood to neighborhood. One of those key components are nonprofit human services, spaces that we might have kind of participated in, places we might have interned in this summer. Nonprofit human services are about $200 billion of expenditures in any given year, much larger than most of our anti-poverty programs put together. We don't understand that often because the data is fragmented. There's 70,000, 80,000, 100,000 organizations doing work. It's a diffuse space to try to understand what's happening. But we do know that when we start to pull data together, that these localized services are not well matched to need and aren't responsive to the geography of poverty. It's also important for us to understand that there are significant disparities in assistance, access to assistance, provision of assistance by race and ethnicity. Because race and ethnicity shape where we can live, where we are able to live, the kinds of housing units we're able to rent or buy. The fact that our safety net assistance varies by place maps right onto that. And it's high poverty communities of color that often lack access to the most important programs and resources, particularly the ones that are generated at the state and local level or administered at the state and local level. That's a key takeaway and a key understanding. There's a lot of reasons why the safety net exists this way. Some of it is about the fragmentation and decentralization of the American federal system. Some of it's about the competitive pressures, racism, and NIMBYism that's present in that decentralized system. Some of it's about the perception gaps that we've talked about today. And a lot of it is about our limited commitment to public funding of our welfare state. We spend a lot less than most other peer countries that we would compare ourselves to. So we know what's happening now, right? We know that unemployment rates are skyrocketing. We can imagine that poverty rates will eclipse the Great Recession, probably come close and maybe, and I would guess exceed what we would have had in the Great Depression if we measure that, if we could have measured poverty the same way back then. We know the economy is contracting. We hope that there'll be a quick recovery, but it's also true that recessions accelerate and amplify ongoing changes in labor markets. So I think the poverty problems we have will be with us for some time, and we haven't really even started to confront the budgetary realities. This is what's happening now. This is the world that we inherit in the post-pandemic spaces that we'll occupy. And when I try to think about what's next, I've thought about those who fought the war on poverty 50 years ago. People like us, students, professors, leaders of human service organizations. What did they think was happening in 1968 when they had optimism that poverty was going to disappear? You can actually go back and read historical documents, books, articles, where there was optimism that if the economy continues on its current pace, in just a few years, there will hardly be any people living below the federal poverty line. It sounds fantastical, but it was a true belief. Well, how is it that they had that belief and those expectations? And what can we learn from maybe what we would think of now as the naive expectations or belief? I think reflecting on what the war on poverty fighters thought helps us think about our work moving forward. First, there was this expectation that a rising tide economy would lift all boats. Continued expansion and growth of the economy, increases in GDP, increases in productivity would elevate everybody above the federal poverty line. 50 years later, it's pretty obvious that economic growth alone, the market alone, isn't enough to reduce poverty. We've had expansions of GDP and productivity that we couldn't have imagined over the last 30 or 40 years. And yet poverty remains stubbornly bouncing between 11 to 15, 16%. The economy isn't the thing we can rely on to solve poverty problems. And part of that is because wages have stayed flat since the 1970s. And yet we know that when wages increase, we reduce poverty, particularly when we increase wages at the bottom end of the wage distribution. And so we need policy tools that can raise wages. The market alone is not enough. Here in Seattle, and I think in many places, we should consider higher minimum wages, adjusting the minimum wage to $12 an hour, which would keep it on pace with what it was intended to be when it was adopted in the 60s, along with current safety net programs, would raise most families with children above the federal poverty line. And not just $1 over the federal poverty line, but well above the federal poverty line. And even though those opposed to the minimum wage will tell you that it will lead to economic ruin, most of the research evidence done in a vast variety of different places suggests that there's only a relatively negative and short-term effect on work and that over the long term, there aren't negative consequences. Now, we found some evidence of job loss here, but also that's the growth of our economy in Seattle has kind of left that in the dust. It's something I think that we should consider, and I think it's really important. We can't rely on the market alone. And that's what the War on Poverty fighters thought. Second, the War on Poverty fighters thought government should play a positive role. They expected government to do more. We occupy a world, however, since 1968, where there are greater political obstacles than economic challenges, perhaps, to fighting poverty and reducing poverty. And so, even though as a country we prefer private forms of assistance, it's important for us to realize that we can't donate our way, we can't volunteer our way out of poverty. We would have to triple our national giving to charities just to replace the food stamp program alone, let alone the other large public programs that are so important, that are so effective at reducing poverty. So we have to understand that poverty is a political problem and that government has a proper and important role in tackling poverty. It's an obligation. And to me, it's a moral obligation. And then finally, those who fought the war on poverty thought that inequality was diminishing. With the civil rights legislation that had been passed, with access to voting, with the reduction in administrative barriers that people of color experienced to the safety net, there was this sense that inequality was going to fade, that we had a rising tide economy plus institutional changes that would bring more people into the labor market, that would reduce inequality by race, ethnicity, and place. But instead, what we've seen over the last 50 years is racial and economic inequality have intensified. And these inequalities are reinforced and promoted through the tax code, which many of us benefit from. But it's led to persistently high rates of poverty despite growth and expansion. So some people benefit, but many people don't. So these are expectations that the war on poverty folks had that weren't born true. We can learn from this. It's also important for us to remember that as smart as we think we are today, 50 years from now, people will look back and say, what were they thinking in 2020? How could they have thought that was the right way to proceed? So we also have to realize that we have to approach this with some humility and continue to think about what we don't know and think about what our learning is. So what's our work? I'm going to close with this slide and then we can do some Q&A. What is our work? First, our work is to demand more, particularly around the fight to end structural and institutionalized racism. That means participating in protests for some of you. It means holding your institutions accountable. It means hiring differently. It means providing opportunities differently. For our white colleagues, it means not only being good allies and advocates, but also learning when to step back. And for those of us who are older, the challenge for us is to step back and let others lead and support the voices of others. That's the challenge for us as we get older. So we need to demand more racial justice. There's just no two ways around that. That's the most important piece for us today. We need to think more. We need to challenge stereotypes about poverty and its causes. And we need to do that thinking in concert with others so that we don't just think, but we learn and we spread the message. We need to pay more. We need to pay people in low-wage jobs more because right now, low-wage work is a trap. It's a trap for too many people, and the kind of work-based safety net doesn't allow us to escape poverty when we experience it because jobs just don't pay very well and there's no pathways to them, often very few benefits at the low end of the labor market. We need to spend more. We need to spend more federally on programs that we know work. We need to maintain our commitments to those programs, and we need to spend more to reduce the gaps in human services that I document across geography and to ensure that we seed new nonprofits and new public programs where they don't exist. And we're not talking about trillions and trillions of dollars, although today we do spend trillions and trillions of dollars. We're talking about the amount of money that we spent on the last tax cut that was enacted in 2017. That would actually do a lot to stabilize and equalize our safety net and invest in private nonprofit programs that we know are so critical to our communities. We need to give more. We need to expand private philanthropy. Only 1 out of every $10 we give goes to an anti-poverty cause. And that just doesn't cut it, particularly when we rely on private efforts so much as a country. We need to empathize more. This is critical. We need to spend time focusing on our common strengths and assets and connections and focus less on holding people accountable focus less on personal responsibility. I get a nice mortgage income tax credit every year, and no one comes to my door and asks me what kind of food I'm buying, or am I having more than one drink a week, or whatever. We don't hold me responsible for that, and we shouldn't be holding people responsible elsewhere. And I think that's true with my Christian upbringing, where I was instructed to not spend too much time judging others and focus on sharing and loving and being compassionate and being empathetic. We need to point the way more. And this is you. This is your generation. We need the next generation of leaders to step up, and we need to do it to get leaders involved, not just in their universities, but in elected office and in positions of representation at all levels of government, to bring in new voices, frankly, indigenous voices, if you will, from the communities most affected by problems of poverty. And finally, we need to work together more. As I end the book, I talk about a shared fate. We can't tackle poverty in any one place if we don't tackle poverty in all places. And that's has been true for some time, and it's particularly true today. So as I wrap up here, these are the challenges as I see them. Your summer starts to close, and you'll be returning to campus in person or virtually, and your path begins today. You've chosen an audacious path, one that seeks to reduce poverty and inequality, one that seeks to provide help with dignity, empathy, and respect. You were born to be leaders. You are here today because you lead through example in the small aspects of daily life. You are here today because you want to make major life commitments to change. You are meant to lead in this moment. This is your time. Congratulations on your work. May you be strong in the months ahead, and God bless you all. Thank you very much, and I look forward to questions.
Okay, so we have a few minutes for questions, and you can submit them into the chat, and then I'll tell Scott.
So we got a question in the chat room, which is an important one from Camp. This is a conversation that we have a lot. The question, some people argue that welfare programs motivate people to stay unemployed so that they can keep their benefits. How do you respond to this argument? Well, I think we can find anecdotes that this happens, right? You can always go out and find anecdotes of people who may be abusing programs. In Mississippi, I think Brett Favre benefited mightily, perhaps, from the TANF program, and maybe didn't work for it. But we can find examples of this all over the place. I think the reality, and we talked about this in the student session, the reality is that low-wage work doesn't lift most people above poverty. And it's only with work and safety net benefits do we get anywhere close. And if you look at the supplemental poverty measure, you see the evidence that work combined with safety net assistance gets people over the hump. But the hard thing in low-wage work is the jobs are hard, they're demeaning, they come with no benefits, they have unpredictable schedules, they don't pay very much, there's no paths forward. And if you've ever done any kind of workforce development work, I guess, you'll find that it's easy to get somebody into the first job if they've been out of the labor market, but getting to that second job or that promoted job is very difficult. And so I think we have to open ourselves up to this understanding that we need a safety net that allows us to kind of manage, essentially, the fact that low-wage work isn't a pathway out of poverty, and that many of those jobs are dead-end jobs that aren't great to work. And we kind of have to provide incentives for higher paying jobs and maybe high road jobs, but we also have to realize that we have a commitment to providing supports along with work. And very few people who are poor are not working because of choice. It's a small, small percentage. The vast majority of people who aren't working, who are of working age, are caring for an adult or a child with a disability, are a student, or have a health condition of their own that prevents them from working. So even though in our rhetoric we think that this is a big, big problem, we could eliminate the folks who are chiselers or cheats, however you want to use the term, and it wouldn't put a dent in our caseloads, it wouldn't put a dent in our expenditures, because most people are playing by the rules and are stuck in this kind of position where the labor market just doesn't reward work effort in a lot of places. $7.25 an hour, it doesn't get you much in most places. Yeah, so the minimum wage alone, this is a great question from JC. So it's about the minimum wage and poverty reduction. The minimum wage alone isn't going to reduce poverty for most people. You have to have it, again, in tandem with workplace benefits. And actually, Camp's question is important because underlying Camp's question and JC's question is the sense that there are marginal tax rates. It's what we call them in academic speak, where as you earn more, you become less eligible for safety net programs and benefits like housing subsidies, childcare subsidies, food stamps, things like that. And so you can have like a modest increase in your wage that leads to a sudden dramatic drop in your overall income because you lose safety net benefits. And so the minimum wage by itself isn't enough to get you over the poverty line. We need, unfortunately, we would still need to have food stamps and housing subsidies and other things. But what we can do is smooth out the phase out rate so that if you do get a minimum wage job at $12 an hour and suddenly maybe become income ineligible or close to, we can smooth out that transition period, much like we do for the earned income tax credit. There's things we can do to kind of navigate that. I think we are concerned that, like, I don't think $15 an hour is probably the right place to be for every place. And certainly kind of smoother phase-ins of a higher minimum wage would help buffer communities from the economic cost. But I think the research evidence is pretty clear. Even though we found some small negative consequences in the labor market, I think in overall it's a net positive for workers. And whether you set it at 10 or 12 or 15, I think you have to figure that out in tandem with federal and state and local laws. But certainly we're not going to make a dent in poverty if the minimum wage stays at $7.25 federally. It just isn't. We're not ever going to be able to get to where we need to be. Caroline, as we see young and progressive movements coming about in our nation, activists call for the abolition of capitalism. How do you think capitalism plays a role in poverty? And do you agree with a more socialist future? So this might be an okay boomer moment, even though I'm not a boomer, I'm a Gen Xer. But I don't think a socialist economy is a path forward. I do think that our capitalist system creates inequality. It allows inequality to perpetuate, and we need to figure out policy solutions for that. We need to have the political will to tackle those problems. I think we could raise wages and make jobs better, and that would get us a long way. But I'm not about a socialist future. I don't think if you spend any time in the former Soviet Union or other places that are deeply socialist states, you realize that those are not viable models. And I think we can do better with what we have here. But I do think we need to expand voice and political representation. And that's not socialist, that's just democracy. I don't know, Raven, do you know how I should pronounce this next name? It's an awesome name. Maybe he or she could pronounce it for us. Is it Evanid?
Evening.
Evanid, it's a wonderful name. Thanks for your question. Do you believe that the information about poverty being everywhere is kept from the public because there's just that stereotype, or is that information purposely kept from the mainstream media because it divides the public? Thus, we do not collectively fight for minimum wage increase or well-structured safety net. Oh, wow, there's a lot of good stuff here. These are smart people, Stephanie, Jim. These are some smart people you got here. So I don't think this is there's not like a conspiracy to keep the geography of poverty secret. Some of it is just a function of our data. Our data don't actually reflect geography very accurately when it comes to poverty. In fact, actually our poverty data is really dated. So we won't really know what happened with poverty problems in COVID until late 2021, like to kind of give you a sense of how much of a lag time there is. I think the data gaps combined with kind of the whiteness of scholars, frankly, in these spaces kept us blinded. I think our tradition of focusing on urban poverty also blinded us. But remember, urban poverty is characterized by racial segregation, deep concentrated poverty in communities of color, and the growing up in a high poverty place as a kid has all kinds of negative downstream consequences. So the focus on urban poverty was smart and wise and just. But I think it does allow us to kind of make these connections between place and race, which then undermine our willingness to help. I think the media has covered this phenomenon, and after the Great Recession, I suspect you will see media narratives during the COVID recession about how suburbs and rural places are being hit. and this will kind of percolate. But the media likes conflict, right? The media likes clicks, and so you always want to be a little careful about how you view media stories of these things. They're designed to get you to click on the story. But I think reputable research organizations have been putting this kind of work out for some time and will continue to do so. What I like here about this question is it's giving us a sense that we should be critical thinkers and critical learners moving forward. Will, what are your opinions on a universal basic income? Well, Will, a year ago, I had this conversation with my students here, and I thought there's no way we would spend $2 trillion on a universal basic income. But of course, I think in the summer, we'll spend $3 trillion on all kinds of stuff. So who knows? I think that there's probably ways that we could have some kind of UBI that would work and maybe not break the bank. I mean, one of the challenges we're going to face as a country moving forward are the large deficits that we've accumulated over the last 4 years, and kind of the fact that we have to pay on that. So I'm not sure if we're going to be primed for more spending, but I think there's ways to tailor it. What we should be keeping our eye open for, Will, are some experiments that people are doing where they're giving cash to families. Greg Duncan and Catherine Magnuson. Greg's at UC Irvine, and Catherine's the director of the Institute for Research on Poverty at Wisconsin. They're experimenting with giving people cash, kind of in a UBI experiment. There's some UBI light approaches that are good. If you're interested in this, you can either email me. You guys have my email. But there's an article by Hilary Hoynes, Hoynes, and some colleagues that talks about different scenarios for UBIs. We just don't know very much, actually. These are kind of prominent conversation pieces, but there's not a lot of research evidence, and so we just don't know. What we do know is that the negative income tax experiments in the 70s, which were vilified for having bad negative effects, actually the research was pretty flawed on those studies, and so we think now that something that looked like a UBI 30 or 40 years ago actually didn't have the disincentives to work and marriage that people were worried about. I suspect, Will, when you're sitting in my chair, whatever, 30 years from now, I just turned 50, you'll be talking about something that looks like a UBI, and it'll be common and commonly understood. Raven has a question. Raven, why don't you read your question since you're here co-hosting?
Okay. I said I would also like to hear more about poverty in the pandemic. Has poverty increased? What is the impact of the pandemic to poverty? And what's happening to like the programs that were helping these people who are living in poverty or like the homeless?
Yeah. So I think this is really important. If we kind of use the equations that economists have developed to this point, the increases in unemployment that we've seen are probably commensurate with increases in the poverty rate of anywhere from 3 to 6%. And so that would put us above the Great Recession and probably pretty close to a 20% poverty rate. Now, this may be short term for many people as they go back to work, but many jobs may not come back. And so we should expect that to be durable. The last recession, it took almost 10 years for poverty to return to its pre-recession level. And we may expect that to be true now. I think this is going to be more of a sluggish recovery than a V-shaped recovery. We don't really know what's happening in programs right now. I'm on calls all the time where we're trying to figure out how to understand what's happening with service providers. Frankly, you all are better poised to talk about this because you've been on the front lines. So one of the things you can do with your voices is write pieces in Medium or on your blogs or an op-ed and try to get the word out about what's happening in local organizations because we just don't have good data, and you have the best vantage point at this point. I don't have very much time, do I? How much time do I have?
I was about to say about 5 minutes.
Okay. Let's see. Laura, will you email me and we'll talk about trickle-down economics? I don't know where you are on the screen, but I don't think trickle-down economics has reduced poverty. I think that's, if you look at the last 40 years, that's true. I think the tax cuts to more affluent individuals are great for them, but I don't think they get a lot for other people. That's fairly established economic evidence, but I think there's still political debate about that. Let's see what else. Abigail has a question. How do we educate powerful people who aren't seeking understanding? Well, I think you do your work and then you take their jobs, and that's how you educate people. If they're not willing to learn and grow with you, then that's your cue to step up and lead. And whether that means running for office, whether that means getting on boards of nonprofits, whether that means being an advocate, a public intellectual. That's cue for you, for us to lead and step up. And Abigail, I'm confident in your ability in that. So we're closing up here. Know that if you have any questions, you can email me. I hope that all of you think about coming to the University of Washington at some point, or Seattle for work, for grad school. It would be great to see you here. Let me know how I can support your endeavors. And thank you to Stephanie and Jim again for this opportunity to learn with you, to challenge our thinking, and to find a path forward to reduce poverty.
Scott, thank you. Terrific. Great job.
Thank you, Scott. That was amazing. And we need to keep you around to keep us on time. You're better at that than I am. What an amazing session. Scott, you stepped in ways well beyond what our initial phone conversation was and email exchanges. And I can't tell you how much we value your time. As a reminder, you know, Scott's honorarium is going to go to a nonprofit in the Seattle area, and that is one of his practices as a scholar whenever he offers a keynote or his considerable expertise on these matters. So very much practicing what he preaches about all of us giving back and being involved in the philanthropic side of this. Raven, thank you so much for doing introductions, and to all of our interns for such thoughtful questions. We are going to take about a half an hour break so that you can grab something to eat and take care of other things that are pressing right now. Let me just give a couple of housekeeping notes to you before you jump off. Please don't disconnect from the Zoom call. We have you assigned already to your breakout sessions that will start at let me convert my time here. That will start at 12:30. So please, you can shut your video down, mute, whatever, you know, walk around, do whatever, but please don't disconnect just so we can move you efficiently into those rooms. So for our interns, you will be going into breakout session 2 with your research groups. When you come back into the main room, I'm going to share a Google Doc with you that just has a couple of prompts for, you know, to kind of get you centered. And then I have an ask for you to come out of that room with when you're done. And so please do come back into the main room, and we'll make sure everybody gets back in here, and I'll come back on screen and let you know what's up and before you move out. For everyone who is not an intern, those interns, the breakout session number 2 is a student-only session. There will be no faculty, staff, community partners, SHEP staff in those meetings. So we're protecting that space for our students so that they can have some authentic conversations about this experience that was unique to them this summer. Instead, what we'll be doing is we will be staying in the main room, and some of our SHEP mentors are going to update our community about the academic program and about the experiences they had with the interns this summer in those weekly discussion groups and with the artifacts that the students worked on in their research. So please do join us for that. We are going to reconvene at 12:30. That's Eastern time. So I'm hearing the clock outside of my office strike 11 o'clock Central Time. I will see everybody in half an hour, and we'll try to get as many people into the main room as possible before we send anybody out to breakout sessions. So enjoy your break. Please send Scott a follow-up email with any questions that went unanswered. And also, if you want to thank him for the time that he invested in the program this summer. All right, I will see everybody back in here at 12:30 Eastern Time. Thanks. Thank you, Scott. That was amazing.
I hope it was on point.
It was.
Maybe a little more political and radical than maybe we envisioned, but hopefully it hit the spot. Thanks for this opportunity. I really, it's been fun, and I just think I think the world of this program, and the students seem just on point. So congratulations to you and Jim and others on this, and thanks for Thanks for,
Scott, I'm gonna get back to you on a separate conversation about some of the new strategic work that we're doing. And it might be soon. I might get to you in the next week or 10 days. I hope that's okay.
yeah. Let's be in touch, and I'm happy to talk more, and if there's a role I can play and be helpful, I'm happy to think about that.
Super. Yeah, I got some new ideas, and I'm trying to bounce those ideas off as many people as possible, particularly people like you. So I would look forward to that, and hope I can get back in touch with you on that.
For sure.
Thank you.
For sure. Stephanie, I hope we get a chance to connect in person at some point.
Me too.
And you know, I really appreciated the opportunity to get to know you. It's been really great. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And listen, best wishes for the remainder of your summer and for a safe beginning to the semester. Enjoy your family time. And I'm sure that you and I will be in touch again soon.
Great. All right. Be well. I'll see you all soon. Have a good rest of your summer. Be safe.
Thank
Have
you.
a good weekend.
Bye.